Professor Kilrath had been teaching xenobiology for 17 cycles. 17 cycles of explaining to fresh-faced academy students why they should never, under any circumstances, approach a Vraxian sand viper without proper containment fields. 17 cycles of watching hormonal adolescents from 14 different species try not to kill each other during lab practicals. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the human. The girl sat in the third row, her primitive bipedal form slouched in a way that would have earned her a disciplinary notice on any other world. Her designation was Maya Torres, according to the registration crystals, and she looked about as threatening as a fluffian moss bunny. Small by galactic standards, barely reaching 5.5 feet, thin arms, no visible natural weapons. Her skin was an unremarkable brown, her hair pulled back in what his cultural database informed him was called a ponytail. She was chewing something, some sort of elastic polymer that she worked between her teeth, with an expression of supreme boredom. Kilrath's tail twitched nervously. He had read the files. All of them. 3 times. Earth. The Deathworld that had somehow spawned a sentient species despite having surface conditions that would make a Korthian battle grunt weep. Gravity that could crush a Delarian's bones. Atmospheric oxygen levels that were technically classified as a fire hazard. Weather patterns that shifted with homicidal unpredictability. And the humans had not only survived there, they had thrived. "Good morning, class," Kilrath began, his vocal synthesizer translating his clicks and whistles into galactic standard. "I trust you all completed the reading on symbiotic relationships between silicon-based microorganisms and their crystalline hosts." A chorus of affirmative responses echoed through the amphitheater-style classroom. The human girl, Maya, raised one hand lazily. "Yeah, about that," she said, her voice carrying that strange flat quality that human speech had. "Your textbook says silicon-based life requires temperatures above 300 degrees Celsius to maintain metabolic processes, but that's not entirely accurate. There are cold silicon variants that use quantum tunneling for electron transfer. They were discovered in the Andromeda sector about 5 years ago." Kilrath felt his secondary eyelids flutter in what he hoped did not look like panic. She was correct. The textbook was outdated. The council had not approved the new edition yet due to budget constraints. "Yes, well," he managed. "That is technically accurate. However, for the purposes of this course." "Just saying," Maya interrupted, popping her gum. "Might want to update your materials." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the class. Kilrath noticed several students edging their seats away from the human. Smart younglings. The door to the amphitheater hissed open with a pneumatic wheeze. Kilrath's 3 hearts stopped beating simultaneously. Standing in the doorway, his massive frame barely fitting through the aperture designed for standard galactic species, was Thorax, a Krenathi. A genuine scales and fangs and murder instincts. Krenathi. The Krenathi were apex predators from a world where the food chain was less of a chain and more of a circular firing squad. They stood 8 feet tall on digitigrade legs, possessed retractable claws that could shred plasteel, and had a bite force that could crack a starship hull plate. Their eyes, slitted and golden, could track movement in 17 different spectrums. They were, by any objective measure, the most dangerous natural-born killers in the known galaxy. Thorax lumbered down the aisle, his clawed feet clicking against the polished floor. Students scattered like Ventaxian preyfish. A Delarian girl actually fainted, her gelatinous body puddling beneath her desk. "Apologies for my tardiness, Professor," Thorax rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. "The registration office had difficulties processing my dietary requirement forms." I can imagine," Kilrath stammered. His translator was working overtime to keep his voice from squeaking. Thorax's golden eyes swept across the classroom, cataloging every potential threat, every possible escape route, every soft target. It was instinct. Krenathi could not help it. They were born hunters. His gaze lingered on the human girl. Maya looked up from examining her fingernails. She met Thorax's stare without flinching, without the pupil dilation that indicated fear, without the chemical scent markers that every other species released when confronted by a Krenathi. She smiled, not a fear grimace, not a submission display, an actual smile showing her flat little teeth. "Hey," she said casually. "That seat taken." She nodded to the empty chair directly beside her. The classroom went so quiet that Kilrath could hear his own blood circulating through his vascular system. Thorax tilted his head, a gesture that in Krenathi body language indicated curiosity rather than aggression. His nostril slits flared as he analyzed her scent profile. No fear pheromones, no stress hormones, nothing. "It is not occupied," Thorax replied slowly. "Cool. Sit wherever." The Krenathi predator cub, scion of a species that had terrorized 3 star systems before achieving spaceflight, lowered himself into the seat beside the Deathworld girl. Kilrath made a small whimpering sound that his translator mercifully did not broadcast. The first hour of class proceeded with the kind of tension usually reserved for disarming antimatter warheads. Kilrath lectured on cellular respiration in methane-based life forms, while watching the human and the Krenathi from the corner of his compound eyes. They were not fighting. They were not even posturing. Maya was taking notes on a primitive paper notebook, her writing implement scratching across the surface in loops and lines. Thorax had deployed a holographic interface, his clawed fingers moving with surprising delicacy across the haptic controls. At one point, Maya's writing implement rolled off her desk. Thorax caught it midair, his reflexes operating at a speed that made Kilrath's lecture stutter to a halt. The entire class watched as the Krenathi's massive clawed hand, capable of disemboweling a Grokthar bear, gently returned the primitive cylinder of wood and graphite to the human. "Thanks," Maya said without looking up from her notes. "You are welcome," Thorax replied. Kilrath resumed his lecture on autopilot while his higher brain functions tried to process what he was witnessing. The break period arrived like a reprieve from a death sentence. Kilrath slumped against his desk as students filed out, chattering in a dozen different languages and clicking patterns. The Delarian girl had been revived by medical drones and was being escorted to the nurse's station. Maya and Thorax remained in their seats. "So," Maya said, closing her notebook, "Krenathi, right? From the Kren Dominion territories?" "Correct," Thorax confirmed. "And you are human. From Earth, the Deathworld." "Yep. Born and raised in Mexico. That's a region on Earth," Maya added helpfully. "We have lots of regions. We fight about them constantly." Thorax's tail, thick as a human thigh and tipped with bone spurs, swished in what Kilrath's database indicated was amusement. "My species also engages in territorial disputes. It is how we establish dominance hierarchies." "Oh, we do that too, except we also argue about which food is best, which sports team is superior, and whether pineapple belongs on pizza." "What is pizza?" "Buddy, you have no idea what you're missing." Kilrath watched this exchange with the sort of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching binary stars collide. They were just talking like normal students, as if one of them was not a biologically engineered killing machine, and the other was not from a planet that considered cyanide a mild seasoning. "Professor Kilrath appears distressed," Thorax observed, his predator's awareness noting every detail of the environment. Maya glanced over at the teacher. Kilrath tried to look busy organizing his data tablets. "Yeah, he's been jumpy all morning," Maya agreed. "I think he's scared of me." "An understandable reaction. Your species has a concerning reputation," says the guy with the fangs and the murder claws. "These are merely evolutionary adaptations for processing food and climbing," Thorax replied with what might have been dignity. Your species survived on a planet where the weather actively attempts homicide, and your own biology is a cocktail of controlled poison systems. I read your file. Your blood contains cells that attack invaders. Your stomach acid can dissolve metal. You persist in a constant state of barely contained self-destruction and call it health. Maya grinned. Fair point. We are kind of ridiculous when you put it that way. I find it fascinating, Thorax admitted. Most species achieve sentience by minimizing danger. Humans achieved it by ignoring danger entirely and hoping for the best. We call it optimism. We call it insanity. They both laughed. The sound of a human laugh and a Kranathi's rumbling chuff blended in a way that should have been impossible. Kilrath's tail was doing that twitching thing again. The second half of class focused on practical application. Students were divided into pairs for a lab exercise involving the classification of unknown biological samples. The assignment was meant to be straightforward. Analyze the sample, identify key markers, categorize accordingly. Kilrath had deliberately prepared samples that were all herbivorous, non-toxic, and incapable of causing harm even if mishandled. He was taking no chances. Pair assignments are posted on your terminals, Kilrath announced. Please proceed to your designated lab stations and remember that safety protocols are mandatory. Any student who triggers a containment breach will be subject to academic sanctions. The class shuffled to their stations with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Kilrath checked the pairing algorithm results on his data tablet and felt his stomach drop into his lower intestine. The system had paired Maya and Thorax together. Of course it had. The algorithm was designed to randomly assign partnerships to encourage cross-cultural cooperation. It had no way of knowing it had just created the most potentially dangerous combination of students in Academy history. Kilrath watched helplessly as the human and the Kranathi made their way to Lab Station 7. All right, Maya said, pulling on safety gloves that looked comically oversized on her small hands. Let's see what we've got. Thorax activated the containment field around their sample tray. Inside, a small organism that resembled a fuzzy blue sphere rolled around aimlessly, bumping into the walls of its enclosure. Preliminary scan suggests it is a juvenile Plaxian pod beetle, Thorax noted, studying his scanner readout. Herbivorous, non-aggressive, native to temperate forest environments. Cute little guy, Maya observed. She tapped the containment field, and the creature rolled toward her finger, apparently curious. Your assessment protocol appears to involve minimal scientific rigor, Thorax commented, though his tone suggested amusement rather than criticism. Hey, cuteness is a valid survival strategy, Maya defended. Looking harmless makes other species less likely to eat you. It is brilliant from an evolutionary standpoint. An interesting perspective. On Kranath, we have a saying, that which appears harmless is merely waiting for an opportunity. On Earth, we have a saying too, do not judge a book by its cover. What is a book? Maya paused in her examination of the beetle. Oh boy. Okay, so books are these things made of paper, which comes from trees, and we write information in them using ink, which is made from various compounds, and then we read the information by interpreting symbols we call letters. Thorax stared at her with his golden slitted eyes. Your species stores data in compressed plant matter. When you say it like that, it sounds weird. It is weird. Fair. They worked through the sample analysis with surprising efficiency. Maya's observational skills were sharp, her questions precise. Thorax's knowledge base was extensive, his logical reasoning sound. They complemented each other's strengths, filled in each other's knowledge gaps. Kilrath found himself actually relaxing slightly as he monitored their progress. Perhaps this would not be a complete disaster. Perhaps the human and the Kranathi could coexist in an educational setting without triggering some sort of diplomatic incident. Then the alarm went off. A piercing wail filled the amphitheater, accompanied by flashing red emergency lights. Students looked up from their workstations in confusion. Kilrath felt his blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. "Attention!" the automated system announced in a calm voice that contradicted the screaming alarm. "A containment breach has been detected in Laboratory Sub-Level 3. All personnel are advised to evacuate to designated safe zones. This is not a drill." Sub-Level 3. That was where the Academy kept the genuinely dangerous specimens, the ones used for advanced research, the ones that required triple redundant containment fields and armed security. "What kind of specimen are we talking about?" Maya asked, her voice cutting through the rising panic. Kilrath checked his emergency notification feed. His 3 hearts, which had just started to settle, began racing again. "A Vraxian sand viper," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Adult, fully mature." The classroom erupted into chaos. Students scrambled for the exits. A Pluraxian knocked over an entire equipment cart in his haste to escape. Someone was screaming in ultrasonic frequencies that Kilrath's audio receptors could barely process. Maya and Thorax remained at their lab station. "How dangerous are we talking?" Maya asked calmly. "Vraxian sand vipers are ambush predators from a desert world," Thorax supplied, accessing his mental database. "They can burrow through solid rock, sense electromagnetic signatures from a kilometer away, and possess venom that liquefies internal organs in approximately 45 seconds. "Great," Maya said flatly. "So, pretty dangerous." "I have encountered them before during survival training," Thorax continued. "They are not impossible to handle, but they require significant caution and preferably heavy weapons." "Professor," Maya called out, "what is the evacuation protocol?" Kilrath was frozen at his desk, his survival instincts warring with his professional obligations. As a teacher, he should be organizing the evacuation. As a living being who valued his continued existence, he should be running for the nearest escape. "Pardon, protocol," he managed, "is to evacuate to the surface-level safe rooms and seal all blast doors between here and sub-level 3. "How long until the security teams arrive?" 4 to 6 minutes, Kilrath replied automatically. Maya looked at Thorax. Thorax looked at Maya. Some sort of unspoken communication passed between them that Kilrath's advanced neural pattern recognition system completely failed to interpret. "That is a long time for a venomous predator to be loose in a building full of students," Maya observed. "An accurate assessment," Thorax agreed. "Someone should probably do something about that." "Also accurate." They stood up simultaneously. "Wait," Kilrath said, his voice climbing several octaves. "What are you two planning?" Maya picked up a containment pole from the equipment rack. It was designed for safely manipulating small specimens from a distance, basically a long stick with a grabber claw on the end. In human hands, it looked like a woefully inadequate weapon. "We are going to go make sure that thing does not eat any of our classmates," Maya said simply. Thorax extended his claws with a sound like swords being drawn. His golden eyes had shifted into full predator mode, pupils contracting to slits. "This is inadvisable," he said calmly, "but I cannot allow the human to attempt this alone. It would reflect poorly on Krenathi honor. Plus, you kind of want to fight a giant snake thing," Maya added. "That is also a factor, yes." Kilrath watched in mounting horror as the Deathworld girl and the predator cub walked toward the door that led to the lower levels, moving with the casual confidence of beings who had never learned proper fear responses. The last students were fleeing up the emergency stairs. The automated doors were beginning to seal, blast shutters descending with hydraulic hisses. "This is against every safety regulation in the Academy Charter," Kilrath called after them weakly. Maya looked back over her shoulder, still popping that elastic polymer between her teeth. "Yeah," she agreed. But here's the thing about humans and Kranathi, Professor. We are both kind of terrible at following rules when something more interesting is happening. She and Thorax disappeared through the door. Kilrath stood alone in his empty classroom, surrounded by abandoned lab equipment and overturned chairs, listening to the alarm wail its monotonous warning. Somewhere in the building, a venomous predator was loose, and the two most dangerous students in his class were hunting it. He reached for his emergency flask of Deltarian brandy, kept hidden in his desk for particularly stressful teaching days. 17 cycles of teaching had not prepared him for this. The stairwell leading to sub-level 3 smelled like recycled air and industrial cleaning solution. Emergency lighting bathed everything in a sickly amber glow that made the metal walls look like the inside of some massive digestive tract. Maya's footsteps echoed against the grated stairs with a rhythmic clang that would have made any sensible predator aware of her approach. Thorax moved behind her with surprising silence for something that weighed roughly 400 pounds and had claws that scraped against metal. "So," Maya said conversationally, as if they were not descending toward a escaped venomous predator, "how exactly did your survival training cover these viper things?" Thorax's tail swished in what his body language protocols indicated was concentration. "The instructors released 3 juveniles on a remote island. We had to survive for 5 days while they hunted us. 2 of my clutch mates did not complete the exercise. Did not complete as in failed, or did not complete as in died. The distinction is not always clear in Kranathi education." "Right. Hardcore. Got it." They reached the landing for sub-level 2. Through the observation window in the blast door, Maya could see an empty corridor stretching into shadow. Automated systems had killed the main lights, leaving only the emergency strips along the floor baseboards. "Your species has unusual training methods as well, correct?" Thorax asked, his predator senses scanning the corridor beyond for heat signatures and movement. Maya shrugged, adjusting her grip on the containment pole. "I mean, we do not deliberately release venomous animals on children, but my grandmother did make me catch scorpions with my bare hands when I was 7. Character building, she called it." Thorax's head swiveled to look at her, his golden eyes reflecting the amber emergency lighting. "Scorpions, the arachnids with neurotoxic venom delivered via their tail stingers." "Yep, those ones. Your grandmother sounds formidable." "She really was." They continued down to sub-level 3. The blast door here was sealed, its security panel blinking an angry red that indicated lockdown protocols were active. Through the reinforced window, Maya could see that the corridor beyond was dark except for intermittent flashes of sparking electrical systems. Something had damaged the infrastructure. "Can you override the lock?" Maya asked. Thorax examined the security panel with the kind of focus that came from millions of years of evolutionary optimization for hunting. His claws moved across the haptic interface with delicate precision. "The system requires administrative clearance," he said after a moment. "However, there is a maintenance override that can be accessed if one knows the proper command sequences." "Let me guess, you know the proper command sequences." "I may have researched the Academy security systems during my application process. Knowing one's environment is a survival trait." "Thorax, did you hack the Academy database?" "Hack is such an aggressive term. I prefer thorough reconnaissance." The blast door hissed open with a pneumatic sigh that sounded like the building itself was expressing disapproval of their life choices. The corridor beyond was a mess. Ceiling panels hung at awkward angles, sparking where their mounting brackets had been torn free. The walls bore deep gouges that looked like something massive had scraped against them while moving at speed. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, and what appeared to be sections of ventilation ducting. "Viper went this way," Thorax observed, pointing at a trail of disturbance that led deeper into the sublevel. "How can you tell?" "The damage pattern indicates a serpentine motion. Also, I can smell it. Vraxian sand vipers secrete a distinct pheromone when agitated, sulfur compounds mixed with aromatic hydrocarbons. Maya sniffed the air. I just smell electrical fire and cafeteria food. Human olfactory systems are notoriously limited. Hey, we make up for it with other senses, like our ability to throw things really accurately and our endurance running. Both deeply unsettling traits, yes. They moved down the corridor, Maya in front with her containment pole held like a spear, Thorax slightly behind and to the side where his peripheral vision could cover the maximum area. Their movement was not coordinated through training or practice, but through the kind of instinctive pack hunting behavior that emerged when two predator species recognized each other as partners rather than threats. The research laboratories lined both sides of the corridor, their doors sealed and their interior lights dark. Through observation windows, Maya could see rows of containment tanks, monitoring equipment, specimen storage units. Everything looked intact. Whatever had escaped had done so without damaging the other specimens. Small mercies. Question, Maya said quietly. Your people hunt in packs, right? Typically. A hunting party consists of 4 to 7 individuals, depending on the size of the prey. So you are used to coordinating attacks. Since before I could walk properly, yes. Good. Because I have an idea, and it is probably going to be stupid. Thorax's rumbling chuff of amusement echoed off the metal walls. I am discovering that I enjoy human stupidity. It is refreshingly direct. They found the breached containment lab at the end of the corridor. The door had been torn completely off its hinges, the reinforced metal twisted like aluminum foil. Inside, the specialized tank designed to hold a Vraxian sand viper was shattered, its containment field generators smoking ruins. The room beyond was dark, except for a single emergency light that swung slowly on its damaged mounting, casting moving shadows across the walls. It is still here, Thorax whispered, his voice dropping to a subsonic frequency that Maya felt more than heard. How do you know? The heat signature. Vraxian sand vipers are ectothermic, but they generate localized heat through muscular contractions before striking. There. He pointed with one clawed hand toward the far corner of the room. Maya squinted into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she made out a shape that her brain initially tried to interpret as a pile of cables or bundled pipes. It was neither. The Vraxian sand viper was coiled in the corner, its body easily 20 feet long and thick as a human torso. Its scales were a mottled pattern of browns and grays that would have provided perfect camouflage in a desert environment. Here, against the sterile laboratory walls, it looked alien and wrong, like something from a nightmare that had decided to visit reality. Its head rose slowly from the coils, a triangular wedge the size of a human chest. Sensory pits along its jawline glowed faintly in the infrared spectrum. Its eyes, multiple sets of them, arranged in a compound pattern, reflected the emergency light like clusters of tiny moons. The viper's tongue, forked and long enough to reach across the room, flickered out to taste the air. It was looking directly at them. Okay, Maya breathed. That is significantly larger than I was expecting. Adult specimens can reach 30 feet, Thorax supplied helpfully. This one is actually on the smaller end of the size range. Not helping, buddy. The viper shifted its coils with a sound like leather sliding across stone. Its head tracked their movement with the patient focus of something that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of killing. If it strikes, it will aim for center mass, Thorax said, his voice calm despite the rising tension. The venom is delivered through retractable fangs in the upper jaw. Contact with any mucous membrane or open wound will result in rapid systemic failure. Again, not helping. I am merely providing tactical information. Provide some tactical information about how we catch this thing without dying. Thorax tilted his head, his predator brain running calculations. Sand vipers hunt by ambush. They are not built for prolonged chases. If we can force it to strike and miss, it will be vulnerable for approximately 3 seconds while it reorients. 3 seconds. That is not a lot of time. It is sufficient for a Krenathi attack pattern. However, someone would need to act as bait to draw the strike. They looked at each other. "I will do it," Maya said immediately. "Absolutely not. You lack the reflexes to evade a strike at that speed. You lack the small profile to effectively bait it. That thing will see you coming from a mile away. Your fragile human body cannot withstand even a glancing blow. Your giant Krenathi body cannot fit through half the spaces in this room if we need to maneuver." They glared at each other with the kind of intensity that would have terrified any observer. This was not aggression. This was two apex predators arguing about who got to take the more dangerous role. The viper, apparently tired of waiting, decided to make the choice for them. It struck with a speed that made thought irrelevant. One moment it was coiled in the corner. The next, 20 feet of armored muscle was flying through the air, fangs extended, heading directly for Maya's center mass with the inevitability of a guided missile. Thorax moved faster than conscious decision. His massive arm swept Maya aside, throwing her clear of the strike path with enough force to send her sliding across the floor. In the same motion, he twisted his body, presenting his shoulder guard instead of his vulnerable torso. The viper's fangs struck the hardened bone plate that all Krenathi wore as natural armor. The impact sounded like a hammer hitting stone. The viper recoiled, confused. Its venom had failed to penetrate. Its prey was not behaving correctly. Thorax did not waste his 3-second window. His claws raked across the viper's neck, targeting the softer scales where the head met the body. It was not a killing blow. Krenathi combat doctrine emphasized disabling strikes over immediately lethal ones. A wounded enemy could be studied. A dead enemy taught nothing. The viper shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and writhed away. Blood, dark and thick, oozed from the gouges in its scales. Maya was already moving. She rolled to her feet, grabbed the containment pole, and drove it forward like a spear, activating the grabber claw function at the last second. The mechanical pincer closed around the viper's tail, just above where it tapered to a point. The viper whipped around, trying to bring its fangs to bear on this new threat. "Thorax, the tank!" Maya shouted, holding on to the pole with both hands as the viper's thrashing threatened to tear it from her grip. Thorax saw her plan instantly. The shattered containment tank still had its base intact. More importantly, it still had its power supply. The containment field generators were damaged, but not destroyed. He lunged for the control panel, his claws flying across the interface with the speed of long practice. "I need 10 seconds, he called out. "I do not have 10 seconds, Maya yelled back as the viper yanked her forward, dragging her across the floor like a child's toy. Her feet scrambled for purchase on the smooth laboratory floor. The muscles in her arms screamed in protest. The containment pole was bending under the strain, the metal creaking in a way that suggested imminent structural failure. The viper's head swung toward her, mouth opening to reveal fangs that dripped with venom. Maya did the only thing she could think of. She let go of the pole and ran, not away from the viper, toward it. The serpent's predator instincts, honed by evolution to track fleeing prey, kicked in automatically. It pursued, its body uncoiling with liquid grace, its head drawing back for another strike. Maya dodged left. The viper followed. She dodged right. The viper adjusted. She was hurting it, drawing it toward the containment tank through pure kinetic momentum and the viper's own instincts. Thorax saw what she was doing and felt something that might have been respect, or might have been the Krenathi equivalent of amused horror. The human was using herself as bait, but she was doing it with purpose, with strategy, with the kind of calculated risk-taking that separated successful predators from dead ones. 5 seconds, he called out. Maya vaulted over a laboratory bench, putting the furniture between herself and the viper. The serpent smashed through it like it was made of paper, scattering equipment in every direction. 3 seconds. She grabbed a beaker from a broken shelf and threw it at the viper's face. The glass shattered against its scales, achieving nothing except making it angrier. 2 seconds! The viper was almost on her now, its body coiled to strike, its multiple eyes locked onto her heat signature. Now! Thorax roared. The containment field snapped into existence with a sound like thunder in a bottle. Translucent blue energy barriers materialized around the viper, forming a cubic prison that conformed to its shape. The serpent slammed into the barriers, testing them, probing for weaknesses. The field held. Maya collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving, her hands shaking with adrenaline aftershocks. Thorax stepped away from the control panel, flexing his claws to work out the tension. They looked at each other across the destroyed laboratory. "That was the stupidest plan I have ever participated in," Thorax said finally. "Did it work?" Maya gasped. "Yes." "Then it was not stupid. It was improvisational. Human logic is deeply flawed. Krenathi logic is deeply boring." The alarm finally stopped wailing. In the sudden silence, they could hear the sound of boots on metal stairs. The security team was arriving, late but present. Commander Vrecht burst through the door with his response team, weapons raised, containment nets deployed, ready for a crisis. He found a destroyed laboratory, a contained sand viper, and 2 students who looked like they had just finished a casual workout. "What?" Vrecht said slowly, his translator struggling to keep up with his rapid-fire clicks. "Happened here." Maya straightened up, trying to look professional, despite the fact that her uniform was torn, and she had viper blood spattered across her shoes. "We secured the escaped specimen, sir," she reported. "Used standard containment protocols. Well, mostly standard. There was some improvisation involved." Vrecht's gaze swept the room, cataloging the damage. The bent containment pole, the claw marks on the viper's scales. "You engaged it," he said flatly. "The alternative was letting it reach the student dormitories," Thorax pointed out reasonably. "That seemed suboptimal. You are first-year students. You have not completed combat training. You are not authorized for hazardous specimen interaction. You could have been killed." "But we were not," Maya said with a grin. Vrecht looked at her, then at Thorax, then back at the contained viper, which was still testing its prison with the patient persistence of something that had nothing but time. "Professor Kilrath is going to have a breakdown," Vrecht muttered. "Professor Kilrath already had a breakdown," Maya corrected. "This is just going to be a continuation." The security team moved in to secure the specimen, deploying additional containment measures and scanning for any other breaches. Medical drones arrived to check Maya and Thorax for injuries. Maya had bruises forming on her arms where the pole had pressed against her skin. Thorax had a minor crack in his shoulder plate where the viper's fangs had struck. Both injuries were superficial. Both of them were grinning. "We should probably head back upstairs," Maya suggested, "before someone decides to expel us." "An optimistic assessment," Thorax replied. "I estimate a 70% chance of academic sanctions." "Worth it, though." Agreed. They made their way back through the corridors, following the security team. The emergency lighting was being replaced by normal illumination as systems came back online. The building was slowly returning to its baseline state of controlled chaos. In the amphitheater, Professor Kilrath was exactly where they had left him, sitting at his desk, his flask of brandy now empty. He looked up as they entered. His expression cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: relief, anger, confusion, resignation. "You are alive," he said. "Yep," Maya confirmed. "You engaged a Vraxian sand viper." "Yep." "You successfully contained it using improvised methods and suicidal bravery." "That is one interpretation," Thorax agreed. Kilrath was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a second flask. "I am going to need to update my risk assessment protocols," he muttered, taking a long drink. "Humans and Krenathi should never, under any circumstances, be paired for group activities." Or, Maya suggested, sitting back down at her desk like nothing had happened, you could acknowledge that we make a pretty good team. Your definition of good is deeply concerning. We saved a bunch of students from getting eaten by a giant venomous snake. You violated approximately 47 safety regulations in the process. Details. Thorax settled into a seat beside her, his claws retracting with a satisfied click. Professor, if I may offer an observation, the human is correct. Our collaboration proved effective. Perhaps the risk assessment protocol should be updated to reflect that certain species combinations, while unconventional, produce optimal results. Kilrath stared at his two most dangerous students. They stared back with expressions of complete innocence that fooled absolutely no one. This is going to be a very long semester, Kilrath said to the universe at large. Probably, Maya agreed cheerfully, but it will not be boring. The rest of the students began filtering back into the classroom, their nervous chatter filling the space. They gave the human and the Krenathi a wide berth, whispering to each other in a dozen different languages. The Deathworld girl and the predator cub had fought a Vraxian sand viper and won. The story would spread through the academy like wildfire. By tomorrow, everyone would know. The humans were not just dangerous in theory. The Krenathi were not just predators on paper. Together, they were something the galaxy had not seen before. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared danger, and the kind of casual disregard for safety protocols that made administrators weep. Maya pulled out her notebook and started copying down the lecture notes she had missed. Thorax deployed his holographic interface and began updating his data files. They sat beside each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. And in a way, perhaps it was. Two species from opposite ends of the predator spectrum, finding common ground in their shared love of terrible decisions and excellent outcomes. Professor Kilrath resumed his lecture on cellular respiration, his voice only shaking slightly. He was definitely going to need a bigger flask. But as he watched his students settle back into their routine, watched the human and the Krenathi work together with easy synchronization, he felt something that might have been pride beneath the lingering terror. The galaxy was changing. Species that should never coexist were finding ways to not just survive together, but thrive. It was terrifying. It was unprecedented. It was, in its own chaotic way, beautiful. Kilrath took another sip of brandy and made a mental note to request hazard pay. He had a feeling he was going to need it.